With loads of new rules and lots of new investors this tax year, I thought it would be worth reviewing some common mistakes that you need to avoid. So here's 5 I've put together for you, and in no particular order, let's start from the first one. Up first, be careful taking money in and out of your ISA. You might end up getting yourself into a bit of a mess. So most of your ISA accounts allow you to do what you want with your money. For example, with a cash ISA or a stocks and shares ISA, you can take money out whenever you want. Nice and simple, and this is one of the biggest benefits to an ISA when you compare it to something like a pension, for example. However, what you need to be careful of is putting money back in and not paying attention to the limits that you can contribute. So let's just say that we're in a new tax year and you've put in £10,000 to a stocks and shares ISA, and now it's working away in the stock market for you. A short time later, maybe you made a profit or you just need to take some cash out for whatever reason, you withdraw £2,000 from your ISA. Then, a few weeks later, you now want to deposit £2,000 into your ISA again, because in your head you want to get back to that £10,000 that you had invested. Well, here's where the issue begins. So assuming that you've not put money into any other kind of ISA account in that tax year, you've used £10,000 of the £20,000 limit that every UK adult gets. Any money that you withdraw does not suddenly change the fact that you've put in £10,000 to that account, as this is actually what gets counted. So the moment you put in £10,000 to this account, technically you've now put in £12,000, and therefore you now have just £8,000 left to contribute in that tax year. Now this can be confusing because in your head you've only put in £10,000 in total, as you withdrew £2,000 and then you just put it back in later. Now here's where things can get interesting, and there is a way to get around this, but please do just be careful if you are taking money in and out regularly. Now, if you are planning on doing this, you will need to check if your account is a flexible one. Now, not every provider offers a flexible ISA, so do check this beforehand. But if they do offer a flexible ISA, this means that any money you do take out can be replaced by the same amount without affecting your contribution allowances. So let me just do another quick show on screen now. A flexible ISA would look like this, and a non-flexible ISA would look like this. So it's all about how the money you put in gets counted and whether or not the money you withdraw is part of that calculation. Anyway, I hope that all makes sense. It's a very easy trap to fall into, and it could end up kind of pushing you over the limits if you're not very careful, which leads me very nicely to my next ISA mistake. As I just said, don't go over your limits. Now, many of you out there will know that the total amount you can put into your ISA account is £20,000 per tax year, as I said earlier. It's been the same for several years and hasn't changed, unfortunately, especially as inflation's gone up. However, with the new rules that are now in place that allow you to open multiple kinds of the same ISA account, I can easily see how easy it would be for people to go over their limits without thinking about it. In previous years, you were only allowed to open and put new money into one type of ISA account per year. So for example, if you opened a new stocks and shares ISA, you could quite easily manage your allowances because you knew that whatever money you put into that account would add up and count towards your total £20,000 allowance in all of your ISA accounts that year. Now that you can open as many ISA accounts as you like of the same type, quick caveat here, you can only open one lifetime ISA. Please be aware that this is the exception and has not changed. However, because you can open as many of the rest as you like, I think that this will make it slightly more confusing for people who want to make sure that they don't go over their limits. Now, I know this is only going to affect a small number of people who are lucky enough to be able to max out their ISA allowance, as £20,000 is a huge amount of money, but it's still worth mentioning anyway. I'd say that for all of you out there, just think of a way to track all of that money that you're actually putting into your ISAs. Make a quick spreadsheet on Google Sheets or just have some kind of strategy to monitor what's going in. If you do end up going over your allowances for whatever reason, you could have your ISA allowance voided for that year, and this means that you could lose the tax-free status of your account. Ultimately though, it's up to you to do this, as the platforms themselves have no way of knowing what money you've put in across all of your ISA accounts. So you will have to ignore the apps and the platforms themselves when they say you have X amount in your ISA allowance to contribute if you've already put that amount of money in another platform. So anyway, just be careful. And finally on this point, before we move on to the next one, remember that transfers of ISAs do not count towards your allowances. I get this question asked all the time, and I know it can be really confusing. The best way I try and explain this now is to imagine that your ISA accounts are all like bright orange buckets that you get from B&Q. when you put money into that bucket, that's new money going in. But once that money is in, you can do whatever you like with that bucket. For example, you can take that bucket from provider to provider, transfer it to whoever you like, and this will not affect your allowances for the current tax year. Now, I've done this recently myself, and I've moved one of my ISAs or my bright orange buckets to another provider. Now, just on that note, if you do want to get yourself started with the Stocks and Shares ISA, I do leave all of the platforms I use in the description below. And I've created a handy spreadsheet looking at all of the main platforms this year. Just pop in your email in the link and I'll get that sent over to you straight away. Okay, next point. Make sure that you use the right one because each type of ISA is a little different from the other. For example, a cash ISA is designed as a place you can put your cash and then have it give you some interest. Now, some cash ISAs might be for a fixed term and some can be flexible, but you do need to check that out before you choose one. Then a lifetime ISA is great if you're looking to buy your first house or save for retirement as well, but you can't take money out without a penalty. Now, you do get a nice top up from the government up to £1,000 if you top up the maximum amount of £4,000 though. Then a Stocks and Shares ISA allows you to invest in pretty much anything on the stock market, individual companies, as well as mutual funds and ETFs. And finally, an innovative finance ISA lets you put your money to work with peer-to-peer lending platforms. You can typically get a bit more interest than a cash ISA, but then you are taking a bit more risk as well. Now, there's a couple of things I wanted to highlight for you when I say make sure you choose the right one. Firstly, imagine you have quite a bit of money you want to invest for the long term, but also some money you want to save as well. If you use up your cash ISA with all of your savings, this will reduce the amount of money that you can contribute into your Stocks and Shares ISA. For example, let's say that you have £30,000 altogether, £20,000 that you want to invest and £10,000 that you want to save. If you were to put all of that £10,000 into a cash ISA, you would then only have £10,000 left in your overall ISA allowance that you could put into a Stocks and Shares ISA. I mean, it's a nice problem to have, but bear with me for a second. This leaves £10,000 that you would have to invest somewhere else and potentially even a general investing account that would then be liable to tax. Now, if we think about this for a second, I'd make this point here that you could be a bit smarter with your money. Remember, every person in the UK gets a personal savings allowance, and the amount will depend on how much you earn. So for example, any basic rate taxpayer, so pretty much anyone earning less than £50,000 a year or less, gets up to £1,000 of tax-free interest on all of their savings accounts. Higher rate taxpayers get £500 as you can see, and then additional rate taxpayers get nothing, boo-hoo. Now, at current savings rate, some of the best accounts might give you around 5% a year as interest, and 5% on a £10,000 account would give you £500 in that year. So unless you had loads more money in savings or you were an additional rate taxpayer, I'd argue that there's no point using a cash ISA here, and that way you could have invested the entire £20,000 that was left into a Stocks and Shares ISA. And now both your cash and your savings are free from any taxes. Secondly, another point I wanted to raise here was if you wanted to use a lifetime ISA, don't forget that this will get you up to £1,000 per year for free. So if you are investing for a really, really long term and you know you don't want to touch your investments, you could put money here first rather than using a Stocks and Shares ISA. Just a thought, but hopefully you get the point here that you should try and be a bit strategic if you can. Okay, point 4 is you need to keep an eye on dividends. Now, for many of you out there, whether you invest in individual companies or just index funds, there's a good chance that at some point in your investing journey, you will get paid some dividends. When you get paid a dividend, it will end up in your investing account. And depending on what platform you use, you might not even know where it's gone or if you've received any money at all. Now, I say this point because Vanguard, as a good example, does not send you any kind of notification email to let you know what you've actually received and if you've received any dividends. Please change this if anyone's from Vanguard actually watching this. And some of their most popular investment funds pay dividends 4 times a year, usually once every 3 months. I was talking with my partner the other day about her investments, and I realised that she had money sat there in her account from dividends that were doing absolutely nothing. So please do check your accounts and get those dividends working for you. Now, this will depend, of course, on what platform you're using, but there are lots out there now that allow you to reinvest money automatically. So do make sure you have this set up if it is available, because if you don't do this, over the very long term, you will lose a bit of the power of compound interest because you can have all that cash there just doing nothing. And believe me, this could cost you a lot of money. Another option you have here is that if you are using index funds or ETFs, you will often find two versions of the same investment that are available. Now, one will pay a dividend and one will not pay dividends, but instead will just reinvest that automatically back into the fund when the fund receives a dividend. For example, I'll just use Vanguard as a good example as it's a really simple one, but have a look here on their website. This mutual fund comes in two versions. Now, as you can see, accumulation or income. Accumulation will not pay a dividend, and income, as you can guess, will pay you out that money. Now, sometimes you might see this referred to in short like AC or DIST, which is just short for accumulation or distribution. Now, just look out for these and make sure that you find exactly what you want. ETFs especially, you'll need to look out for these and remember that they will trade under different ticker symbols. For example, a really popular Vanguard ETF that allows you to invest in the S&P 500 is called VUSA. Some people might pronounce it VUSA, and as you can see it here now on Trading 212. But this one pays a dividend. If you want the version that doesn't pay a dividend and reinvest it instead, you will need its sister fund, which trades under VUAG. Sorry to make investing even more complicated than it already is, but do make sure that you look out for these so you don't cost yourself a lot of money and just leave money doing nothing on the side. Now, the final point I wanted to cover was this one. This is a bit of a double tip in one, but first off, make sure you use your ISA allowances, as if you don't use them, you lose them. There's no way to go back once you are in the new tax year, which is unlike pensions, where it is possible to go back and make contributions. Even if you just put the cash in and don't invest it, this could be worth doing just to give yourself the option, especially if we're approaching a new tax year, for example. Now, as well as this, and making sure that you use your allowances, don't forget that you can also be strategic here and work with your partner if you have one. If you've maxed out your ISA allowance, the next step could be to max out your partner's allowance as well, because remember that you have £20,000 per adult in the UK, and this is regardless of your income or whether you're employed. So if you are in a stay-at-home parent situation, nothing is stopping you from working together and having a total of £40,000 allowance between the two of you. And as an added bonus, let's not forget that there are junior ISAs as well. So for each of your children, you are welcome to contribute up to £9,000, which can also grow tax-free until they're 18, at which point it becomes their own adult version for them to do with what they want with. And hopefully then you'll refer them to this video and they can try and learn something about investing. Anyway, you could even use this as a threat for bad behavior and pretend that if they don't eat their vegetables, you'll take away their investments. Clearly you can tell I don't have kids. Anyway, I hope that was useful. Next up, if you're looking for a review of the best platforms, here's a video I did for this year going through all of the best stocks and shares ISAs. Or as another option, if you don't need that, here's some of the best index funds that you can invest in that might help you get started. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. As always, happy investing.